Details in video games are like little love letters, tiny bits of extra effort that largely make no difference to the quality of the product, but lets the player know that this was a project filled with passion and personality. Monster Hunter has always been good at this. Be it the more understated environmental details of the old games, or the cavalcade of visual flourishes of Monster Hunter World, small details that enrich the world and experience of the games are all over the franchise. Realizing that you can extinguish a monster's fire breath by throwing water moss into their mouths is, functionally speaking, not a huge deal, and it isn't something you will do all that much. But despite this, it feels like a bombshell, because it makes the game world just a tiny bit more believable, a little bit more connected through causality and logic. And this feeling is something I, at least, associate deeply with Monster Hunter, as something that it has always done right, in my opinion. And then there is Monster Hunter Rise. Despite being a financial success and generally well received, the actual level of quality and polish are harshly debated within core communities. Graphics, monster roster, gameplay, and of course the franchise famous details are all topics which have caused Rise to be a bit of a controversial entry, which is understandable. After the incredible polish and AAA quality of Monster Hunter World, Rise was a game that had a lot more limitations due to it being on the Switch. That's not really its own fault, but it is a fact of reality. I don't really have a horse in this race. Every Monster Hunter game except the first one is good in my opinion, but I do feel that while the details of previous games were celebrated and documented, Rise's little touches seem to go more unnoticed, to the point where some people seem to believe they don't exist. This is all to say that I felt like making a little celebration of some cool details within Monster Hunter Rise. Just a chill little showcase of some cool things in a game that can often feel a little overly scrutinized. This is not a video that attempts to convince you that Rise is better than any other game, but I simply think that Rise did quite a lot of things right, and that its details deserve a little bit of praise. These are in no particular order, and honestly I don't even know how many I'll include. And of course, spoilers for Base Rise and Sunbreak. Let's start with the discovery that made me want to make this video in the first place. Rise introduced many fun and interesting creatures, but one standout has to be Raknakadaki. As only the second non-subspecies Temnoceron, it was bound to be special, and its fight doesn't disappoint, with its two distinct states that require different strategies. Gown mode sees most of the creature covered in silk, and Rachna is much more mobile here. In Brood mode, the monster builds a huge webbed brooding chamber on its back, which limits its mobility and presents the juiciest weak spot of the monster, while also making it hit harder in return. It's a fun back and forth, and it is augmented by a few cool details. For one, there are multiple ways to make Rachna change into Brood mode, where you'll want her to be anyway because you want to exploit that fat weak spot. The main way I knew about was to break the silk off her legs. Once you get 2 or 3 of them, she collapses and then grows her brooding sac. But there's another method. Every Raknakadaki spawns in Gown mode with up to 5 little Rachnoids fused to her. She will use these Rachnoids for mobility, attack, and distraction. Those 5 Rachnoids are persistent and can actually be killed whenever they are exposed, and killing all of them will force Rachna to enter Brood mode without its legs being broken. But you probably already knew that, so here's the actual fun detail. In Gown mode, Raknakadaki can launch her Rachnoids at the end of a silk string, which then pulls her and allows her to slide around at fast speeds. Well, surprise! You can actually interrupt this move by cutting the string or by killing the Rachnoid. Doing so while the Raknakadaki is already in motion will also topple her for a juicy opening. And as said before, if you do this by killing the Rachnoid, you push her further towards Brood mode. I should mention that this is really hard to do consistently. I had to try for quite some time, and in the end I only ever managed to kill the Rachnoids. I never managed to actually hit the string. I do know it is possible because I've seen it in a Reddit video though. In general, Rise has a lot of this stuff. Extra combat mechanics that are incredibly specific and situational, but overall appreciated. This is seen especially well in the absurd amount of moves and attacks any given monster has now, with some being so exceedingly rare and conditional that it is very easy to just never see them. For example, you may have seen Garangolm's Plateau Nova, a rare ultimate move the Fanged Beast only does when near death and in its second raid stage simultaneously. Well, did you know that this move gets further upgraded by Afflicted Garangolm? AIDS Monkey can combine this move with the government-mandated Curio explosion that all afflicted monsters get access to. The conditions for this are on screen now, and the result is a massive double explosion ultimate that is actually fairly easy to never see if you just never fight Afflicted Garangolm or if you kill him too quickly. And the game is full of these fun and weird scenarios that are rare and exciting to encounter. One of my favorites relates to another one of the three lords, Luna Garen. Werewolf Boy here is another monster with multiple states. It can supercharge its body to start glowing red, and it can cover itself in ice armor, with both of these special states being independently toggleable. This leads this monster to have multiple unique attacks that will only use under specific conditions relating to where it is currently with either of those states. For example, if the Luna Garen is currently not red, but has its ice armor on and is out of stamina, only then will it use its grab. The grab itself isn't anything crazy, but what I really love is what he does if he misses the grab. He just stares into his hands in angst, a true edgy classic monster. There's something so charming not just about this animation itself, but all of these moves and behaviors that aren't guaranteed to show up. Seeing them happen feels like a treat, a special little moment between you and the game. Speaking of rare behaviors, this one is so uncommon, I couldn't even get my own footage for it. Somnacanth is another of Rise's new stars, a grotesque mermaid that assaults the player with various ailments, predominantly sleep. However, the Somnacanth can also use a variety of other ailments through the use of shells. Throughout the fight, it can pick up shells from the water and crack them open on its chest, which can then produce a various range of effects. Fun fact, this was the only way a monster in base Rise could inflict blast until they added Basilgoose, which meant that Somnacanth for a while was the only blast monster in the game. But beyond blast, this will most likely produce a flash bomb that will stun your hunter. However, did you know that on exceedingly rare occasions, a Somnacanth can pick up a health clam that will create a healing bubble that heals both the monster and you? It will only do this if it's already been damaged, obviously, and it is a very rare behavior. As I said, I couldn't get it to do it for me. Thank you, Bandlaggy, for giving me this clip. Quick bonus fact about Somnacanth, its English translated name fucking rocks. As a word, Somnacanth doesn't sound particularly weird or odd, but it combines a lot of influences and little hints in it that I find incredibly impressive to fuse together so seamlessly. For one, you have the obvious one, somnus, which means to fall asleep in Latin. But the second part is where the cool stuff starts. Canth comes from the Greek word akantha, which means spine, alluding to the long body shape of the leviathans. However, canth is also associated with the coelacanth, an ancient type of bony fish, which is again a reference to this being a fish-type monster, and cant, without the H at the end, is a Latin italic word for song, which refers to the fact that the Somnacanth can produce sounds that sound like songs in order to lure in prey. The work that goes into localizing these monster names is something that I feel doesn't go appreciated often enough. I'm always going to be grateful for the fact that we got Glavenus instead of Dinovaldo. But let's move away from the entirely new monsters and go over some old classic, things that veterans might know but might be new for new players. Sunbreak brought back one of the best features in Monster Hunter, crabs. One of them is Daimyo Hermitor, the first Master Rank monster you fight and your introduction to the crab-type monsters. He's a fun fight, but there are a lot of intricacies that as a new player you might not notice. For example, you start the fight and they give you a sonic bomb, of all things, which is a little odd. Well, the sonic bomb has a specific purpose, namely in that it is your main tool for gathering crab pearls. The way that works is that sometimes during the fight, the Hermitor will hide behind its claws in a defensive position. If attacked in this moment, it will instantly counterattack for devastating damage, so that's not an option. Instead, what you need to do is throw a sonic bomb at it, which will make it collapse, opening up for damage, and will also always drop a shiny, which will either be a fine black pearl, which is a crafting item, or a crab pearl plus, which is an account item that gives you points. Again, this is not something that you need to know because you can get fine black pearls just through looting, but it is a cool way to farm them if you specifically need them. And it's not to mention just a great way of getting some extra damage in. Oh, bonus fact for crabs as well. I know it doesn't really matter anymore with Rise because you now have the icon that shows you when a monster is dying. But when a crab's spit turns blue, that's when you know it's close to death because it's actually spitting up its own blood. Because crabs have blue blood in Monster Hunter. Very cool. Another one of Sunbreak's greatest additions was Oceaniz. Frontier is one of those games that everyone just wants to see more of because it was tragically shut down before it could really hit its stride with the Western fandom, and so seeing monsters and elements from Frontier show up in the main series is generally a cool thing that I enjoy a lot, and Oceaniz is definitely a wonderful addition, one of the best fights in Sunbreak by far. Part of that is because he's so devastating if you actually do get hit, with its fireballs causing fire blight, paralysis, and poison, which means that getting hit by one of them is usually a death sentence. But on an ecology level, it is also interesting how that is even possible. While little is said in-game about that, we can actually observe a mechanism that might explain this odd combination of ailments. When the Oceaniz is unbothered but awake, thus rummaging around the map and looking for food, it will sometimes eat paratoads and poison toads. It'll crouch down and just chomp them up. And again, we have no specific lore on this as of right now, a data book will surely explain this, but I would wager good money that this is how it gets poison and paralysis properties into its fire breath, which is really cool and is also, I believe, the only way another monster can remove endemic life from the map. Usually that is reserved only for the player. Moving on, we have Sunbreak's title monster, Malzeno, which is one of the coolest fights we've had in ages. I love his theme, I love the entire vampire aesthetic, it is phenomenal. And one thing they lean heavily into is that vampire vibe. From the way he looks as if he's wearing a Victorian collar, to the way he struts about all cockily, to the fact that he can literally transform and teleport like the original Dracula, is just a bunch of wonderful touches. But one of my favorite little details is that when the Malzeno is tired or otherwise exhausted, he will, like many other monsters, go and seek out smaller creatures to feed on. However, instead of just killing them and then eating them like any of the other monsters, Malzeno will kill them, then back off, and then send his Curio minions to collect the dying monster's life force to then siphon into itself again, in a truly vampiric fashion. It even has the Curio fly back onto his throat where they sit and nourish the Malzeno. It is a cool interaction that, again, not many people will see, and just shows dedication to the whole vibe the game has going on. I want to reiterate, this will not change the quality of the game for 90% of people. It is functionally a useless detail, but because you can see the game's dedication to its own fiction, it makes the world feel cooler, feel more lived in, feel just more fun to engage and explore. And this dedication, this attention to detail is what makes these monsters so fun and cool to observe, even when the details you find are really small and don't matter. Yes, I'm talking even smaller than Malzeno feeding. For example, Garangolm, the guardian of nature, seems generally to harken back to images of fertility and a land god, so to speak, the forest spirit. This is, for example, shown in some of the concept art where he's shown tilling the land with his tail. However, one detail in his design that I'm just very fond of is the single small flower growing from his back. Just super cute. You know what isn't cute at all though? The final boss of Sunbreak, Geismagorm. Besides being probably one of the coolest and most spectacular final bosses we've gotten in the franchise, he's also a bit of an odd design. His phalangated jaws kinda make him look like Narwa and Ibushi, but he's clearly not related to them, and the red curio crystals on his back make him look kind of diseased. But a big strength of Monster Hunter in general is the imaginative realism of its character and creature design. Monsters can look outlandish and weird, but they will have elements to their biology that makes them look believable, that makes you go, wait a minute, this could technically exist. I mean, sure, most creature designs get folded by the square cube law, but nonetheless, a big appeal of monster designs in Monster Hunter is that sort of inherent realism that they have despite being a bunch of dragons. And Geismagorm has a really fun example of that. In the lore, Geismagorm is a subterranean dwelling creature. It digs in the earthly crust and only surfaces to feed. Now, when you look at it, that might seem a little weird, this thing is huge. But then you look at its face and the way its body is shaped to be very forward-leaning in weight, allowing it to tunnel through easier. And then you notice its claws. Geismagorm doesn't have typical monster claws, it doesn't have the long nails of Luna Garen, and it doesn't have the articulate hands of, say, a fanged beast like Rajang. Instead, it has sideways facing curved claws, which are a key element of subterranean animals. These are the claws of a mole, thus informing the Geismagorm's lifestyle. Even something as outlandish as the Monster Hunter Devil is given such a small detail that allows it to still exist within the framework of nature that we as humans inherently understand to be logical. Again, it doesn't make this monster exist, but it makes it just a tiny bit more believable and a tiny bit more grounded. A big part of details like that used to be monster behavior outside of combat, at least in Monster Hunter World, which was a game that really focused on the ecology aspect. Now, the old games and Rise both are a little more understated in that regard because they're more focused on what happens in combat. That is not to say there isn't any interesting out-of-combat behavior on the monster's part in Rise. One of the funniest ones is probably the fact that Rathian and Astalos will quite often sit together peacefully if you don't aggro them, which is a reference to that one quest in GU that implied that Astalos can mate with a Rathian, which, okay Capcom, good on you. But another favorite of mine goes back to Somnacanth. As you heard in the lore, and as I said earlier, it is a monster known for singing, and that is something you can actually see in-game. It isn't easy to trigger because it has to be in a specific area or a few specific areas and remain unbothered for quite some time, but once that is a given, it will start singing and humming this eerie tune. And what's really cool is that it will always sing the battle theme of the map it is found in. It's sometimes a little hard to tell, but give it a listen. Just another cool little detail, it reminds me of another fun detail regarding sound, which is that most hunting horns in the game will actually play the monster theme from which the horn is made, or another relevant theme. The Magnamalo hunting horn, for example, plays the Magnamalo theme, and so on and so forth. Sound design is in general a very underappreciated discipline in all mediums, and video games are no exception. So here's a fun detail regarding sound design in Monster Hunter Rise. You know that most weapons have special sounds when you sheath and unsheath them when you hit things with them. But most of them still fall squarely into the category of metal hitting a monster or a gun being fired. However, and if you've played World you might know this, did you know that some weapons have unique sound designs regarding what kind of weapon they are? For example, the Magnamalo sword and shield doesn't make metallic sounds when you swing it, but instead creates the hum of hellfire. Take a listen. Another one of my favorites is the Mizutsune hammer, which is a wind chime and therefore chimes whenever you use it. Very cool, and this is one of those things that, again, most people will not notice, but I notice and they make me happy. You know what else makes me happy? Cats and dogs. Luckily, you can have both of them in Monster Hunter Rise, and they're fun companions that can be supremely powerful in the right situations. But beyond that, you can also deck them out in their own armor and weapons, which comes with its own level of detail. For example, some armors have special effects regarding what your animal is currently doing. The Garangolm Palico armor, for example, sees your cat turn into a miniature castle when you crouch, which is just adorable. Meanwhile, the Geismagorm Palamute armor is a bit more sinister in that it removes your dog's hind legs and causes it to explode in Curio whenever you do a successful drift boost. However, sometimes animal bodies just don't cut it. And that's where the follower system comes in, one of my personal favorite additions Sunbreak made. Because now, finally, you're not the only person doing something. You can get a guy from Kamura or Elgato and tell him, hey, come fight this big dragon with me. It is truly one of the best additions we've had, and it allows for some cool interactivity. I think most people know that your followers can actually go and ride monsters or heal you in a pinch, but they have countless of other interactions with you depending on gestures, depending on if you take a picture with them, if you're eating certain items, or if their stamina runs out and they need to eat certain items. You can blow a kiss at Hinoa and have her reciprocate. You can blow a kiss at Fiorain and have her turn around and walk away from you. You can take pictures of both and see them blush. It's a wonderful system, and I really encourage you to try things out if you're someone who plays with followers a lot. It really adds so much spice and life to this game. Speaking of adding life and magic to the world, one thing that Rise did that I think people really underappreciate is the addition of relics. Relics are essentially pieces of game lore that are working as collectibles. You can find 10 of them in each map, plus a few extra ones scattered that pertain to certain plot elements like the Rampage. Finding all of them reveals a story about the specific area you found them in. And it is maybe the most direct way we've ever gotten in a game to figure out the lore behind some of these places without having to buy the data books. For example, the relic records of the shrine ruins imply that what destroyed the shrines was actually the mating ritual between Narwa and Ibushi, as it speaks of a wind god devouring the land and a thunder god banishing humans and monsters alike. Or, for example, the Sandy Plains, where it is very heavily implied and basically outright stated that the ruins were made when a Valstrax destroyed a settlement there. And you get to hear this letter of a guy trying to find his village and realizing it was gone. Or another cool one is the Lava Caverns, which talks about an anomaly that creates giant holes in the ground. And I mean, I can't prove that this is about Geismagorm, but it sure is a cool little detail. Again, I heavily implore you, if you want to really spend that extra time, go out there and find these relics. They are super cool, and in the process they also make you find new areas of the map while you try to find them, which again just deepens my and maybe your appreciation for the game design and the world of Monster Hunter Rise. But now that we've mentioned the databooks, here's a fun little interaction that happened during the original release of Base Rise and going into the release of Sunbreak. In Base Rise, we are faced with Magnamalo, the title monster and general bad dude that we have to slay. Within the game, most of the lore pertains to his fart gas, which is Hellfire, and to his connection to Rampage, but we don't get too much regarding his specific ecology. In the Monster Hunter Rise art and data book that released right around the time the original game came out, it was explained that for a Magnamalo, its horns, claws, and keratinous growths are incredibly important for sexual displays. The bigger and cooler its horns look, the higher chance it will be allowed to mate. And specifically, these horns never regrow, therefore breaking a Magnamalo's horns condemns it to a life of being an incel. The book specifically mentions that when this happens, a Magnamalo grows much more aggressive and much more fierce. And wouldn't you know it, 1 year later, in Sunbreak, the final monster you can unlock in the DLC without title updates is Scorned Magnamalo, a Magnamalo whose horn has been broken and who is thus turned much more aggressive and territorial and more powerful. It's just a cool connection where the databook kind of foreshadowed a design idea that would be used in the next expansion. Speaking of Scorn Magnamalo, this might be a little better known, but I do know a lot of you don't read quest descriptions. But did you know that the Scorned Magnamalo you fight in its canon story quest is heavily implied to be the same Magnamalo that originally destroyed the first Kamura village. The wounds on its body and the broken horn are implied to be the result of Fugen Hojo and Hamon fighting it 50 years ago. Again, this is probably better known since you just have to read, but considering dereliction exists, it isn't surprising that many people might not know it. I think that does it for today actually. This is a decent amount of details. Let me know in the comments if you knew all of them. If you were not surprised by any of them, then drop a big fat #liar in the comments. Call me a stupid head, whatever you feel like it, just let it go. And if you are a real lore master and actually know more details than these, please let us know. Maybe I'll feature them in a follow-up video. Who knows how well this one will do. But either way, thank you for watching and I'll see you around. Bye bye. A very special thank you of course goes to all of our patrons, including Carthair, Fictionape, Sini, Courage, Eric Nelson, Iron Camel, Jameson Tate, Luden Ther, Paracha, Peroskoko, Project Iceman, Wisdom Minari, Makoto 2, Mr. Meander, and Geo. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.